Maybe. Hello, friends, here at the Parent Tween Connection. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Clarissa Constantine, and I am the founder and CEO of Parent Tween Connection. I am joined by a friend and colleague by the name of Fran Gallaher. She is one of our trusted experts. She is an executive coach and intuitive guide. And the way that she describes the work that she does is that she brings through life changing information so people can make extraordinary changes to see extraordinary results. So, Fran, first of all, thanks for being with me. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Clarissa. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, here in these parts, we are largely about supporting the parents, the grandparents, aunts, uncles, older siblings, and the proverbial village that it takes to raise a child, because I believe the more we support the adults, the better they can connect with the kids, the better they can advocate for the kids, teach the kids self-advocacy, and ultimately the fewer kids we're going to lose to their own hand. So all of the information that we bring to folks here in Parent Tween Connection is in that vein of how to have the healthiest, happiest relationships we can. So here's the ideal that Fran described. See if you can relate. She says, your teen or tween goes to bed early, or at least on time, gets up early, takes care of all their chores, probably without being asked. They get straight A's or straight B's, or they do well at work. They eat well. They eat healthy, balanced meals. And they have orderly habits of eating and sleeping and working and studying, right? Isn't that what everyone experiences? Probably not. So Fran makes a distinction between order and disorder and proposes, offers that when we as human beings don't have order in our lives, that's when we try to control things. Am I understanding that right, Fran?
Well, yes, but I think it's important that the teen or tween creates their version of order.
Right.
As opposed to mom or dad or grandma, grandpa, who some adult in authority, their version of order.
Right.
Yeah.
So I know, even just being married and not having children of my own, that perhaps my partner and I have different meanings of order. So we probably have some parents listening in, or grandparents if they live in the same home, going, but it's my house and under my roof. If you're under my roof, you're going to obey my rules. How does that work in with teens and tweens determining their own manner of order, would you say?
Well, you already know it doesn't work.
Say more.
So I think there can be overarching values that a family has in their home, and that they expect their children to live by, demonstrate those values. And so if the parents have been consistent, there may not be a big hiccup around those values. So the child may just realize that that's the way it is, and they may accept it because it's just part of the air they breathe. I think that not all parents can be consistent, and when there are divorces, for instance, or the introduction of step parents or boyfriends, girlfriends, whomever, or grandma moves in or whatever, those things can disrupt that flow of the values in the family.
Absolutely, because now you have another entity who may have different values.
Yes. And so it's not just part of the background. The other thing is, let's face it, kids have to rebel. They have to reject some of what mom and dad, or whoever the authority figures are, some of what they have imposed upon the child. And ideally, I use the example of a lap swimmer who, when they are swimming laps, they push off the side of the pool. So children, teens, tweens, need to be able to push off of mom and dad. So mom and dad are Republicans, the child might become a Democrat. And, mom and dad like classical music, the child is going to like pop or rock and roll or K-pop or whatever. And if the parents can stay steady with that and say, oh, okay, why are you exploring that? What do you like
Mm-hmm.
about it?
Mm-hmm.
Then there isn't the friction. Because I'm going to tell everybody something that I've had to face in my life, which is that if the child does not get a chance to push off from the parents in adolescence, then the
Mm-hmm.
minute they get in a committed relationship, a marriage, or a partnership, they're going to
Mm-hmm.
push off their mate. So, how many of your listeners have had a partner who rebelled against you
Mm-hmm.
because you see that they didn't get a chance to rebel properly and have the parents maintain a steady state when the child rebelled when they were in
Right.
adolescence.
I actually remember observing that even back when I was in college, recognizing that some of the kids, like some of my peers who came from, I'm going to say like stricter or more steadfast rule based homes where they didn't get a chance to go out and explore, rebel, grow, whatever you want to call it. Those were the kids that came to college and went absolutely crazy with the drinking and drugs and sex and whatever all. And I think sometimes, from my observation, the parents who really struggle with that rebellion or the pushing off feel like they've failed as parents somehow because their kids are not just like following in their footsteps. When in fact, I think that's an indication that they've been rather steady, that the kids are ready to push off against them.
Exactly. And a kid who decides they're going to join the Young Democrats Club and the parents are Republicans, let's say, and they do that as a freshman in high school, let's say, they
Right.
may end up right back with mom and dad as a Republican if mom and dad aren't reactive, because that's why they did it. One of my favorite short stories, a short story writer was Flannery O'Connor. And there was a short story where the mother uh, projected onto her daughter that her daughter had what she called a naturally sunny disposition. And the daughter's name was Joy. The mother had named her Joy. Well, Joy did not want to have a naturally sunny disposition, and she changed her name to Hulga, which was the ugliest name she could think of. So, we have to be careful that we are allowing our children to be who they are, not just shadows of us.
Right. And I can speak, I think, from my own experience with my mom, that I think that's kind of where we struggled. I always said, I always knew my mom loved me. I always knew my mom wanted what was best for me. But what I perceived as what was best for me and what I perceived that she felt was best for me frequently didn't align. And unfortunately, and I will own my part in this, I know you and I have had this conversation. Like, I own that I fell into the same trap that I think she did, where we spent more time trying to prove that we were each right about what was best for my life, that we kind of felt out of the ability to continue to be kind.
Ooh, that's beautiful.
And that's a big part of what drives us at Parent Tween Connection, is to have conversations like this with families, to be able to say, hey, look, here's something to consider. Here's just a different perspective, and try to avoid some of the things that maybe our generation went through with our parents or our children, if we've had them, to just, again, have stronger relationships. So talk to me about the difference between control, like you said, my rules, my house, versus design, right? We know the control is like externally imposed, but how do we support our kids in designing what works for them? Like, how do they even know where to start? How do we know where to start to guide them to design that? What does that look like?
I have 5 grandchildren, and one of them I spent a whole lot of time with ever since he was born.
Mm-hmm.
And what we used to do, because the short version is he did a lot of rebelling with me because he didn't have a chance to rebel with various other people.
Okay.
So I would try to give him the opportunity to design our day. And I would say, I remember one time I made index cards, and each index card had, it was haircut, maybe it was go to the grocery store, um, a few things that were required, and then a few things that were optional. And I said, you can throw out some of the optional things and you can order these the way you want us to do them today.
Okay.
And that way he could be part of the overall plan.
Okay.
And he would try things like, I remember when he was getting bigger and bigger, and he was about 7, and he decided that I had to carry him into the store. So I said, okay. And I made a big deal of trying to hoist that giant child up, and I couldn't. And we both burst out laughing. But because I use humor as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But ever since then, we try to work together. Like I went through a bunch of stuff to get him an appointment. He wanted to stop going to just whoever at whatever chain haircutting place. He wanted to go to a person. So I
Okay.
got that all organized, and then he changed his mind. He didn't want to go. So I just he gave enough notice that I could give enough notice to the hairstylist,
Mm-hmm.
and just try to let him do that stuff wherever possible so that he can be designing what's happening, as opposed to me even though he needs a haircut, right? And he wants a haircut, but I could impose that on him. No, you said you wanted it, blah, blah, blah. I try not to do that kind of thing.
Okay. And so I'm thinking, even like as the kiddos get older, giving them agency is another phrase or terminology that I've heard. I know you and I have had the conversation about autonomy,
Uh-huh.
which I think there's a difference between agency and autonomy. Agency, I see it as more as like being participatory,
Right.
right? In designing the day, designing, when you come home from school, like your freshman year of high school, you're like, okay, I know I'm going to have 3 hours of homework, but I also want to spend some time doing this, or I want to spend some time doing that. Letting the kids decide, when they're doing the fun things versus the work things, maybe, or, agency in designing dinners for the week, or the meal planning, things like that, or choosing which chores they want. But then where does the autonomy come in? Because in my brain, autonomy is more like they do things on their own without mom or dad or grandma having to nag them. Is that your definition of autonomy?
I think those are great definitions of agency and autonomy. One of the things I think is so cool is, if you think of an insurance agency, what it means is that some satellite office gets to act on behalf of the parent company. That's how an agency works. So
Okay.
if the child has agency, they can act on their own behalf and make their own decisions. They can speak up
Okay.
for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Autonomy would be more that they can uh, act more or less completely on their own.
Mm-hmm.
So I do some spiritual teaching. I have a small group, and I've studied the intersection between the spiritual and psychology. I've studied that for some ridiculously long period of time, and because I don't like to say how long, because then I sound like I'm 95 years old. But autonomy is an interesting concept, and I think one of the things that we have to realize is there's no such thing as independence. Everything we do is interdependent. It involves other people. Rarely are we going to be able to do something that doesn't have some impact on somebody somewhere. And so autonomy is when we can act on our own behalf, um, within the knowledge that we're part of a larger community. So some people will act out what I'm going to say is the illusion of independence. So they might, let's say they climb mountains by themselves or something
Mm-hmm.
like that. Um, that they will be compulsive about it, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
But is it really that you are completely independent?
Mm-hmm.
Your footsteps are going down with a lot of other people's footsteps on that same mountain. You're destroying
Well,
the permafrost. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it also strikes me that if you're doing that, you're more than likely using tools that have been made by other people. You're
Right,
using some kind of
right.
hiking poles or boots or some kind of pack or something. The likelihood is that you are benefiting from others' contribution to you. You may not know them personally, but it's not like you made your own shoes and you made your own ice picks and you made your own hiking poles and you made your own pack and you drew your own water and you bought, created your own water filtration system or whatever the case may be. So albeit it may be an individual activity, there's still a community of people and beings and companies around you that have provided the things that you needed.
Exactly. And you're going to have an impact that will be shared by other people who are using the same trail, let's say.
Right.
So, in other words, independence, I think, is an illusion. And it can be that we're acting out our personal narrative, which could be a rebellion. And therefore, is that really how you want to be spending your energy?
Interesting. Okay. So bringing it back to helping kids design their own world rather than imposing our own order. I know one of the things that you talk about is when we try to impose this upon them, when they feel out of control is when we end up with, as you identify it, disordered behaviors.
There you go. Thank you. And I want to clarify, some of your listeners will know that speaking of eating disorders, for instance, is no longer really how people talk. It's more like disordered eating, because I think the term eating disorder pathologizes a behavior. And yes, it can certainly become pathological. It can be life-threatening, and it can even claim lives. But I think at some point in the process, if we think of it only as disordered eating, we can assist people in reframing their experience. So today I did a little bit of research, and I'm terrible at quoting who did the research, but the idea of mindfulness with eating, and a simple way to be mindful is to not eat while you're on your phone, not eat while you're watching television, and just eat and pay attention to what you're doing. And some people are saying that unhealthy behaviors spring up when we're not mindful. So if your family has eaten in front of the television for the last 15 years, it may be difficult to stop doing it completely, but you could do it some. I mean, one of my sons, for years, if we were at someone's house and whatever, I won't eat in front of the television. And he'll apologize to people. Well, my mom won't. My mom doesn't do that. But I won't do it because some studies, now there's some variance, but some studies show that we will eat twice what we would eat normally if we eat in front of the television.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know, like, I'm guilty of this, given the nature of the work that I've done with SAT and ACT, I have a limited window during which kids are available after school and before they tap out for the evening. So I will frequently book clients back to back to back to back. And my amazing husband cooks me food and brings it to me. And I eat at my desk frequently because stepping away to go eat, that's taking out of my work day. Now, I know most people take lunch breaks. I get it. But, there are times that I'm I'm hungry and I've just got students back to back. Otherwise, I'm having them work at 11 o'clock at night. But that's still not helpful for me because sometimes I turn around and I'm like, wow, did I really just eat? Because I almost have the recollection of having eaten.
Right. So one of the things that unfortunately happened, and I'm not an expert on this, but starting around when I had my children, there were some ideas about introducing solid food really slowly and carefully. Well, I read a book that said bullshit on that. Pardon me. I was avoiding one word and that one came out. But in any case, and so I let my children eat whatever we were eating from a pretty early age. So then they grew up eating everything. I have one son who has absolutely no dislikes, and the other one who has one food he does not like, one item. And so what I've seen people do, unfortunately, is follow the medical rule suggestions that were prevalent for quite a few years up until recently, and limit the food choices for children, which then meant that children end up eating pizza and hot dogs unless they want a pizza or a hot dog, you know? And so it is difficult then for a child to develop good eating habits. So
Right.
for people who are just starting out, or who uh, it it might be wise to allow your children to eat everything and not to get corralled into kid food. You know,
Right.
if I had a dinner party, my children ate what I made for the dinner party. And I was also committed to that. So the cost of giving swordfish steak with a pesto dressing or whatever wonderful thing I was making at the time, it didn't deter me. Not that we weren't having a budget and having to be
Sure.
careful about that.
Right.
So it's going to be a little bit difficult depending upon your child's history with food as to how free ranging they might be.
Right.
But to give them choices about what they eat, and to have them impose some kind of order and design upon when they eat, how they eat,
Hmm.
all of that, to give them choices.
Right.
I'm actually designing a weight loss course called Intuitive Weight Loss. Discover the reason why your body agreed to carry weight for you, deal with the reason, and release the weight. And I have to say, a number one enemy of mindful eating and learning how to stop when you're full is the clean plate club. Please do
Oh
not
yeah.
ask children to finish their meals. You can ask them to attempt to take a serving that they think they're going to finish,
Sure.
but do not force them to clean their plates.
Hmm.
Um, I have seen children, and studies show that when children are forced to clean their plate, they don't tune into their body's message that they've had enough, and they
Hmm.
can end up being overweight or even obese.
Well, and so again, and to my mind, that brings us right back to imposing the control or imposing the order versus allowing them the agency to design what works for them, which results in the disorder. If they don't have the insight on creating their own order, it can lead to disorder.
Yes. And then how we talk about food. I remember I had a boyfriend where I ended up cooking and helping with some of the shopping. I became a domestic goddess. It's one of the problems I have. And I refused to be a short order cook. And I was going to make a meal. And I remember discussing with my boyfriend's son um, that I wanted to make fish now and then. And I talked to him about it, and he said, I don't enjoy fish. And I burst out laughing. I said, that's fantastic. I can deal with that reason instead of, ew, I don't like it. But to have a 12-year-old boy say, I don't enjoy fish. I said, okay, then we can move on.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can talk about it in some kind of a reasonable way, um, and we can, abide by one another's preferences,
Right.
I think that's pretty cool.
That's awesome. I love it. We've covered a lot of ground that honestly is a lot in alignment, or is in a lot of alignment with some other folks that we've had. I'm thinking of an interview that we did with Elizabeth Stitt in the first season of our podcast, who talks about, you call it rebelling, you call it pushing off the side of the pool. She called it middle schoolers popping. That like they have to pop, and if they don't pop in middle school, then they're going to pop in high school, and it will be uglier and messier and leave more schmegma on the walls. And then if they don't pop in high school and they pop in college, it's even worse. And so, talking about hey, this is appropriate, they have to individuate, they have to grow their own wings and design their own things. I think you've given us some really good insight as to how to give them that opportunity to start developing agency within bounds that parents are comfortable with. Because there's also an aspect that parents are like, I can look at this and I can see that this is a really bad idea. But there's an aspect of letting them do things that aren't good ideas when they're 5 and 6 and 8 that mitigates the enormity of the bad ideas when they're 10 and 12 and 14, I think.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And then we went on, talking about autonomy and how you said independence is an illusion. I've never thought about it that way. I literally wrote it down because I was like, there's a journal prompt in there somewhere. And I think if we can bring that idea to the young people that we're working with and that we support, it's like, look, you're never going to be entirely alone. You're always connected to others in some fashion. I think that can help grow a little bit of their sense of responsibility for others and for how they act impacting others. Like you said, footprints on the trail. And then we started getting into the idea of trying to impose order or imposing control at the extreme can lead to disordered behaviors, whether it's, and it doesn't even necessarily need to be extreme. Like we can see some of the incremental stuff. So what we're actually going to do, so we're going to call it a wrap for now. And the exclusive part that we're going to, exclusive conversation we're going to have just for our Parent Tween Village folks is going to be talking about the actual disordered functions and things we can do to help mitigate, alter, maybe even reverse some of the disordered behaviors. And I really like, Fran, how you said it's not an eating disorder, which is the pathological approach, as opposed to it's just a behavior that is out of order. And if we can help reframe it, then perhaps we can bring some order back to it.
Yes, I love how you said that. Thank you.
I am excited. So if you are not yet part of Parent Tween Village, check it out. We do have information on our website. Fran, we're going to go ahead and shut down this live, and we will be back in Parent Tween Village in just a minute. Thank you, Fran. I'm so glad to have you.
Thank you, Clarissa. I am so grateful to be here.